welcome back to the DNP podcast. I'm your host, Deb Agbadet. I'm ready for another week of playoff action. This episode will discuss Mike Tomlin stepping down as Steelers head coach, also the Eagles' disastrous end to the season, and their decision to move on from Kevin Patullo. And I'll do the picks for this week's divisional round matchups against the spread. This pod is available on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts, so like, rate, subscribe, and all that good stuff so you can stay up to date with each upload. Last week, we were hit with the news of an 18-year-long tenure at head coach ending. And you know what this week decided to do? One-up it with a 19-year tenure ending as Mike Tomlin has stepped down as head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers, ending his tenure with a record of 201 wins, 126 losses, and 2 ties. Super Bowl title, and an impressive stat of never having a losing season throughout his career so far. But despite that impressive stat, there is a stat that goes the other way, which is most likely the reason that there's been a parting of the ways between Mike Tomlin and Steelers. And that's the fact that they have not won a playoff game in 8 years. Now, let me go through the playoff losses to kind of tell you, the kind of the story of what's, been happening with the Steelers over the past couple of years, which is why you heard fire Tomlin chants and, oh, let's get rid of this guy and things are stale and there's no way we can run it back another year with the same old story. Because obviously Monday night, 30-6, well, the score flatters the Texans because that was like 7-6 for a long period of the game. And then, the fourth quarter, things flip and the score makes it look much worse for the Steelers than it actually was, even though that they, were lost by 24 points, but 36 on Monday night. Last year with Russell Wilson, you have a 28-14 loss on the road in Baltimore. The year before, you walk in with Mason Rudolph and you have a lose by 31-17 in Buffalo. Year before that, or not even year before that, because they missed the playoffs in 22. Then in 21, they lose by a score of 42-21 at the Chiefs. And year before that, 48-37 to the Browns, Baker Mayfield's Browns. And then missed the playoffs in 19. Missed the playoffs in 18, and then in 17, loss of 45-42 to Blake Bortles' Jacksonville Jaguars. So you kind of see that there's, a bunch of drubbings or batterings on the other side where the games aren't particularly close for the most part, at least in the recent times, right? Because 20, 21, 23, 24, 25, that is 5 years or 5 editions, 5 entries into the playoffs where in the wildcard round you are just beaten and battered, and then 2017 you lose close, but to a team that shouldn't really be putting 45 on you in your own home stadium. So with that sort of just commonality and an element of, okay, we're just not competitive in these playoff games, you kind of have to look to one person in particular, the constant that's there for all of those additions, and that is Mike Tomlin. And when I mention, the quarterbacks for each of those playoff losses, most of them having different ones, you're looking at the likes of, a Mason Rudolph, Russell Wilson, who had already been binned off by the Broncos, a Aaron Rodgers, who had, been well past it at 42 years of age, Kenny Pickett, Mason, there's no kind of hope in that regard, because after Big Ben, the quarterback play or the quarterback decision-making that has been made by the Steelers in the past couple of years hasn't put them in the best position to compete at the top end. I remember a couple of weeks ago when I mentioned the fact that, maybe it was time for Mike Tomlin to part ways with the Steelers. It did point to the fact that they're too good or too conservative to actually get a quarterback that they need to get for, proper competition with the peak of the AFC, which now has your Josh Allen, your Patrick Mahomes, your Drake Mays now coming along. Heck, Broncos are up there with Bo Nix this season. So you do need someone of a certain level and not your kind of replacement level, which the Steelers have had in recent years, to compete at that top end. Because even if you look at what draft decisions have been made by the Steelers in years past, you look at this past draft alone, like they're picking at 21, Jackson Dart's still on the board, and I'm sure you could, see the way he's played in his rookie year and say, okay, if the Steelers had Jackson Dart, this job would be a lot more attractive. And Tomlin probably, you never know, could stay a year or two because of, a quarterback in place that could, push him forward in years past, or push him forward in the playoffs to come, or even the years that don't make the playoffs, they're trading to get another linebacker when those picks could have easily been used to get a quarterback that has been in the draft in years past. You look at, like, in 2020 there was Jordan Love, there was Jalen Hurts in the middle to late first, early second round, which if you're of the mindset that, okay, we're going to make a decision to up the quarterback level or get a succession for Ben Roethlisberger, which they didn't have, and even afterwards didn't do to a high enough level, with kind of settling for Kenny Pickett in what has been seen as probably the worst quarterback draft class in the century, you could easily argue, then you could see a team in a much better position because they would have a solid quarterback in place. So it's very I guess it's unfortunate, but it's just, you look at the Steelers in their current state, and a change has to be made. A parting of the ways with the head coach and the team has to be done, because otherwise you're just gonna be middle of the road, be in that horrible purgatory which American sports kind of discourages you from being in, because you're not bad enough to get one of the top players coming in the draft, and you're not good enough to be in the late end of the playoffs and really competing at the top end for a Super Bowl title. So, I mean, no one's really going to argue whether this was the right decision for both parties to be made. But despite that, or regardless of that, the way you look at this Steelers roster and you look at what is available at the minute in terms of the head coaching jobs and the head coaching openings, the way I see it, the Pittsburgh Steelers are the fourth best opening currently available. And the reason I say that is because a lot of the players at the top end of the roster are aging. You look at TJ Watt, 32, Alex Highsmith, 29, Jalen Ramsey, 32, DK Metcalf, 29, who they just traded and given a big contract to, Cam Hayward, 37, most likely retiring, Johnny Smith, 31. And this is players that I'm listing that are on contract or under contracts for next season. That doesn't even mention maybe, what do you do at the quarterback position? Because Aaron Rodgers, I mean, by all accounts, it looked like, the way the production was for that game, that he has played his last game in his NFL career, right? You look at Calvin Austin, even at 27, like Kyle Duggar, like you just mentioned the list, and these are the players that are the best that the Steelers have on the roster at the minute. And you're looking at it and you're saying, okay, I'm expected to win now, most likely without a quarterback, or without an easy path to a quarterback, and then a roster that's on a downward trajectory in terms of, I guess, age in that sense, right? You question, okay, I'm looking at a job like Baltimore where I've got a younger roster and I've got the quarterback in place. At least with Lamar Jackson, it's more of a team that underperformed their expectation, other than the Pittsburgh Steelers, who overperformed or just performed at their level. Like Ravens, coming into the season, you'd easily say that was the best, if not a top 5 roster in the league, and no one's saying that for the Steelers. You look at, heck, the Falcons and the Giants, who, yes, there are questions around the roster. You say Falcons mainly the quarterback position and what you do with that regard, but you look at the roster otherwise, you've got Bijan, Pitts, London. You got on the other side Watts, Walker, Pierce. Those are players that are on the right side of 25, let alone the right side of 30. And the Giants, again, Brian Burns, Dexter Lawrence, Thibodeau, Dart, Scatterbo, Neighbors. Like, you look at teams that have upward trajectories and are being let down by their coaching, as opposed to this Steelers team that, if anything, yes, obviously there are disappointments with what Mike Tomlin has done with them in most recent years, but you wouldn't say that it's a roster that has underperformed their expectations or underperformed what is available to them on the roster, because the roster hasn't exactly been built in the most, aggressive manner, or the most, in a manner that you look at and you say, okay, yeah, we're built to win long term. This is a team that's built to win in the short term, with many win now moves made to ensure that they maintain a certain floor, because the standard is the standard. But in actuality, you look at it and you're saying, okay, like, what am I to do now with this roster that's at my disposal? Like, do you expect me to win a Super Bowl with this? Because realistically, you're not winning a Super Bowl with what's available to you there. But again, in another sense, like, do you tear it down and try and make yourself available to, in 2027, pick one of the upper end quarterbacks in that draft class? Or are you, and again, left your devices to kind of finagle a way to get a quarterback of a certain level? Because looking at what's available this year, like, you're not going to be able to get Fernando, or you're not sure even if Dante Moore comes out. Ty Simpson is one where you question, okay, do we use our 21st overall pick this year to make that pick of bringing in someone at the lower end of the draft and build around him? The free agent quarterbacks or the retreads, you're looking at a Kyler Murray, a Tua Tagovailoa. I mean, you wonder what happens in Indy if they bring back Daniel Jones. You're just looking at it and saying, dude, like, it's tough. It's a tough thing to, at least with, a mind, a look at the offseason to say, okay, is this what is going to take us back to a certain level? Because reclamation projects or retreads have worked in the years past. You look at Darnold, Geno, Baker, at the quarterback position, Daniel Jones himself as a retread. You look at it and you're saying, okay, like, we could squeeze the maximum out of someone who potentially didn't have that elsewhere, but you're still, it's questionable, and you're really unsure of whether that is the right way to move. But it's a very interesting position to put in for whoever the next Steelers head coach is going to be. And it's one where I look at it and you're saying, even though the look at it, 3 head coaches in 50 years for this franchise, like, you potentially have time and that could put it higher in your ranking. But with regards to, like, the roster and the way you're set up for future success, I wouldn't rank this opening very highly. Sunday saw the Philadelphia Eagles end the season with a whimper as they lost 23-19 to the San Francisco Medical Center. 49ers. Many of the bad trends that followed the Eagles all season came back to haunt them, as they were as inconsistent on offense, unable to get their receiving weapons involved, and there was even a bust-up between A.J. Brown and head coach Nick Sirianni. But I guess we shouldn't be completely surprised or annoyed, whatever, by the way the Eagles season finished, because it's kind of what the cycle, the trends have been happening in Philly over the past couple of years, right? You look at 2022, where their season ends with a loss in the Super Bowl to the Chiefs. The next year, they exit in the first round to the Buccaneers after a disastrous, catastrophic end to their regular season. Then 2024, they win the Super Bowl. Great. And then the year after that, they exit in the first round, this time to a, lack of a better word, depleted 49ers team. Like, even during the game, right, Kittle goes out with an Achilles. Hopefully he recovers well. But you just look at it and you say, okay, it's just kind of sort of a team that burns hot and cold year on year. And you just have to ask the question, like, why there can't be just sort of a settled, high level of competition for the team year in, year out. Because you look at the roster, you look at the fact that they've got, Saquon, AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, Jalen Hurts, solid O-line that has obviously got, a lot of ratings over the past couple of years. And then, Goddard, who they've re-signed to a deal as well. And even on defense, Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, Cooper DeJean, Quinion Mitchell. Like, you just list from 1 to 53 players that are in, rank very highly in the league in terms of the roles they play on the team. And you just have to ask the question, like, why, things just can't be good, or things just can't be settled on a week in, week out basis. Like, there's always some sort of controversy, all sort of combustible element to the team. And it just does really point to the head coach and what he's, put in place. You see the decision they made over this weekend, also over the week, with Kevin Patullo being moved on. And you have to ask the question, like, why wasn't Patullo moved on earlier? Why wasn't he moved on during the season? Like, if you look at 2023, when, yes, they made the decision to move on from their offensive play caller, and, the season still ended poorly, but you look at it and you say, like, things clearly aren't working with Patullo. Your 3-and-out percentage is comparable to teams like the Titans and the Browns and the literal pits of the NFL. And you're in a position where you're trying to win a Super Bowl. You're trying to repeat as champions, and you almost, make sure that, your body's fine in the role, and you keep him, in the position that he's currently underperforming in or being underwhelming in. And you have to, you should be making decisions for the betterment of the team. And, you question whether that was the case for Nick Sirianni. And, in the position he's in, it's a very, 2026 is a very pivotal year for Nick Sirianni as the Eagles head coach, because you look at what's happened, in Pittsburgh, where Mike Tomlin's now available and seemingly stepping back for the year. If 2027 comes up or 2026 ends in a whimper like this year did, and Mike Tomlin's out there available, like, the Eagles aren't a franchise that rests on their laurels or sits back and just, because you've won the Super Bowl, will give you an extra 5 years. Like, Doug Peterson won a Super Bowl in the 17th season and got sacked in 2020. So, if there is a decision to be made from, ownership, from Howard Roseman in the front office, like, the Eagles, they aren't slow to pull the trigger if they feel that, they're kind of left in the lurch by the CEO head coach, right? Because Nick Sirianni, he's come in as a offensive play caller or on offensive side of the ball, and he doesn't call the offense. He's not like a McVay or a Shanahan or any other offensive-minded head coach that it's their scheme, it's their imprint that they've put in on the team. Like, the offensive system has changed year on year depending on the coordinator that is put in place by the front office, right? So, Nick Sirianni is definitely someone who, if the Eagles are put in a position where, their season ends with another win for next year, there's very likely to be a situation where he is on the chopping block and is, left in the lurch as a head coach for the Eagles, which, I think there are a lot of people who wouldn't be too against that decision, given the fact that, he, the culture is pretty combustible, doesn't call the players. Like, it feels like he's almost out of all of the top head coaches, despite a great win percentage and the like. He is one of the most disposable, in all honesty, because of how things are in place around him as opposed to because of him. And it's one where, you just have to look at it and you say, if 2026 doesn't go the right way for Philadelphia, there's very much a situation where, we get the notification from Adam Schefter or the, aficionados next year that the Eagles part ways with head coach Nick Sirianni. So, just have to wait and see if things play out in 26. Okay, divisional round picks for, the weekend against the spread. We didn't do this last week, actually, because I did my total, playoff predictions over how the bracket will play out. And to be fair, wildcard weekend, I went 5 for 6. And the one that I got wrong was the game I said, the winner of this goes to the Super Bowl. And, it turns out the Bills beat the Jaguars. So, hold the hands up to say that, I got that one wrong. But, I had the Jags going to the bowl, and the Bills beat the Jags. and the winner of the game, goes to the Super Bowl in my view. So, I guess I'll just go ride my AFC champion being the Bills, but, no problem there. But, the way to keep this thing going on a week to week and this sort of predictions part of the show, I'm going to, pick against the spread like I did in the regular season, which, I ended on a bit of a hot streak if you, paying attention and, minded to. So I feel pretty good about being able to, get things right. Because, like Seahawks, Niners beating the Eagles, pick that one. Texans beating the Steelers, all the games other than Bills Jags, I got them right. So, I feel like I've got my finger on the pulse when it comes to how these playoffs are going to go. But in terms of the spread, we'll see how I perform this week. So I'll do it in chronological. There are 4 matchups this weekend, starting off with 4:30 on Saturday or 4:30 Eastern, so 9:30 UK. Bills going to Denver, and the Broncos are 1.5 point favorites as of recording. So I'll happily take the Bills in that one. I feel like, this is Josh Allen's playoffs to perform to the level without Mahomes, without Lamar, without Burrow to stand in his way. Like, you look at it and you say, okay, like the Denver offense can be got at when you've got a player like Josh Allen who can just, implement and enforce his, Supermanness, for lack of a better term, into the game. And the fact that they're just straight up underdogs, I'll take them winning the game outright. Obviously, this seems like a line that could easily move one way or the other because of, it is the 1 seed coming off a bye, but it also is, Josh Allen, the Bills, and you look at the way they played last week against the Jaguars. They were the team to come out on top because they made the plays when they needed to be made, and the experience came out, to obviously win the day for them. And you look at these teams played off last year. Obviously, the game was in Buffalo, but the Bills had no problems facing Denver's vaunted defense at the time, and to get the win there, it wasn't even close. So I'll take the Bills plus 1.5 in that one. Next up, Saturday night, San Fran Medical Center, heading over to Seattle to face the Seahawks. Seahawks is 7.5 point favorites, and it's a tough one for this. Obviously, because of George Kittle's injury, him going out, it felt like the Niners put everything into winning last week, and it feel like Seattle again coming off the bye with the Niners even having short rests, annoyingly enough for them, with how depleted they are on the offensive side of the ball and defensive side of the ball, right? Really kind of held, duct tape with, linebackers who didn't start the season, and just all the depths they've had to go in the depth chart to field a team that can compete. And obviously all credit to him going to Philly to get the job done there. But it just feels like, this is a step too far, and Seattle kind of enforces their will a little bit, and covers the spread, because the Niners without Kittle as opposed to with Kittle is a big difference. So I'll take Seattle winning that one pretty comfortably there. Go on to Sunday, 8 p.m. UK, Texans at Patriots. Now this is one obviously that didn't show up in my predictions last week because I had the 3 seed winning, the matchups change and alter a little bit. So I didn't have Houston going to New England, which is a very interesting matchup, obviously because of how Houston defense kind of, matches up and really just, lines up and say, beat us as we are. And, a lot of teams struggle to do that. But I do believe with the Patriots, there's 3-point faves in this one because of the way their offense moves. Drake May, Josh McDaniels out on the coordinating side with his play calling. It feels like the Chargers obviously gave him a lot of struggle, and it took a while to break them. But most good teams take advantage of the amount of turnovers that CJ Stroud had against Pittsburgh. And the Patriots are a team just well drilled with Vrabel at the helm that will obviously, if they get the turnovers on that side, they will take advantage of the short fields handed to them. So I'll take the Pats -3 in that one. And then last one, I think, this is the most one side or the other matchup, and one that I feel could be very high scoring. In Rams heading to Chicago as 3.5-point favorites. Oof, okay, I'm doing these kind of as I'm recording here, so I haven't actually decided this beforehand, but I do believe I will lock in the Bears covering the 3.5 because it feels a bit like magic. Feels a bit like you'll get late on and the Iceman Caleb Williams comes to the fore again and really puts up a big performance there. I don't think it'll be enough to beat the Rams. I do still have the Rams winning, but taking the 3 with the hook of the half-point extra. And the Rams will come out on top to have a rubber match between the Seahawks and the Rams. And then my AFC Championship is now Pats Bills, because otherwise the way I've predicted it there. But yeah, I think divisional round weekend, it always provides great entertainment, great games on both sides of the bracket. So yeah, very much looking forward to it, and I hope you are too. That's that's this episode of the DNP podcast. Thanks for tuning in, for getting this far. Like, rate, subscribe, all that good stuff, so you can stay up to date with each upload. And yeah, let's have a good weekend of playoff action. Bye bye.